For example, the first word in the Quran is actually read. They really mean just read this one thing.
One of the problems of getting them to shift their perception, they're not exposed to all the great works.
Feminism doesn't exist in Arabic, so you can't look it up. Secularism doesn't exist.
The only other option is get these people to learn English.
We thought, we spent like, what, $8 trillion on the war on terror, right? Like we marched in and said, like, okay, we're going to bring freedom and democracy to people.
Okay, let's talk about this. Assalamu alaikum, what's going on everybody? Joe Rogan had Melissa Chen on his podcast, and they spoke about some pretty interesting topics, including, of course, the Middle East and Islam. Before I start, please remember to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that bell, just so you know when my videos are coming out. Now, let's get started. Melissa Chen is a well-known human rights activist from Singapore, and during this episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, they spoke about some very interesting topics, and I highly recommend that you actually go and listen to that podcast. But today, I'm just focusing on a few items that I believe need to be clarified. And by the way, nothing that I'm about to say today is an attack on Melissa Chen or an attack on Joe Rogan. As a matter of fact, the majority of the time, they were quite careful in the way they articulated their arguments. And everything they said was more or less in a respectful manner. Everything that I'm about to talk about right now, it's to clarify and rectify some of the topics they discussed. Now let's get started.
I run a major nonprofit organization, and
You want to tell everybody what it is, or keep it on the down low?
No, it's a really, well, it's kind of right up your alley. It's a organization that really tries to promote pluralistic thinking, and basically exporting ideas to the part of the world that it's often censored, and you have narratives that are just not exposed to. People are not exposed to in the Middle East.
Here, Melissa Chen talks about her not-for-profit organization, Ideas Without Borders, which is actually a great initiative. And quite frankly, we need more initiatives like this.
We thought, we spent like, what, $8 trillion on the war on terror? And what was the result? Right? Like we marched in and said, like, okay, we're going to bring freedom and democracy to people. But if there were no cultural institutions to kind of nudge people to understand why they should value freedom and democracy, is it really a surprise that it failed to take root there?
Here is the first issue. Yes, trillions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, have been spent on the war on terror. But listen to this part again.
We marched in and said, like, okay, we're going to bring freedom and democracy to people. There were no cultural institutions that value freedom and democracy. Is it really a surprise that it failed to take root there?
Based on my understanding, the translation of this is, we invaded Iraq to give them freedom and democracy. They just weren't ready. Let's not pretend the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and a bunch of other countries that I'm just too tired to count right now, that all of these were for freedom and democracy. But don't let me tell you this. Let someone else tell you.
Well, here's an interesting article from Time magazine in 2000, before we invaded Iraq. Iraq says it will no longer accept dollars for oil because it does not want to deal in the currency of the enemy. And it's not just Iraq. Remember when we destroyed Libya? Declassified emails reveal NATO killed Gaddafi to stop Libyan creation of gold-backed currency. This was also confirmed by John Perkins, author of the bestseller Confessions of an Economic Hitman. In the months running up to the UN resolution that allowed the US and its allies to send troops into Libya, Muammar Gaddafi was openly advocating the creation of a new currency that would rival the dollar and euro. In fact, he called upon African and Muslim nations to join an alliance that would make this new currency, the gold dinar, their primary form of money and foreign exchange.
I said, we're going to war with Iraq. Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. And by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
From the points that Melissa made, I do agree with some parts of them. For example, the majority of the governments in the Middle East are more or less dictatorships, with very little to no democratic process. Agreed. But Let's not pretend killing hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians, whereby some estimates say they even reached millions of innocent civilians, that this was all just to spread democracy. The war on terror simply created more terror. They created power vacuums and allowed fringe groups to go in power, fringe groups that would have never ever seen power in those countries. And these wars killed the people they were supposedly trying to set free. In other words, we can talk about governments in the Middle East and democracy and whether people are ready for that or not, but let's not pretend that these wars on terror were for freedom and democracy. That's the point I'm making.
Acquire the rights to books that are not available there, translate them into Arabic for free, and then we just like load it up on the library site. Anyone can basically access that and download it. And we do Wikipedia too, so like 10% of all Wikipedia is in Arabic. English Wikipedia. Books like that Sam Harris writes, Richard Dawkins, these kinds of ideas that are really super censored in the Middle East.
Here, Melissa Chen discusses translating books into Arabic, books by Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. I agree that governments should not be restricting books by people who may have differing opinions, even if those opinions are completely against your beliefs. You should be exposing people to these different opinions and beliefs. This will generate discussions, research. It'll allow people to learn about both views, different perspectives, and allow them to make their own informed decisions. So again, agreed.
That is kind of crazy. So the exposure to those ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And the only other option is get these people to learn English, which is a far more difficult task.
Of course. Yeah. And your average person living in, say, Syrian refugee camp isn't going to learn that quickly.
Right.
You got to meet people where they are. It's how do you expect people to kind of break out of their mindset, of their indoctrination?
At this point, I somewhat disagree with Melissa Chen. Or at the very least, I can see how what she's saying can be easily misunderstood or misinterpreted. When she's speaking about the Middle East, she's constantly speaking about people who are close-minded, people who don't speak English, and refugees all over the place, just everywhere, just raining refugees. In the States, it rains cats and dogs. In the Middle East, it rains refugees. And just from listening to this podcast, that's what I understood about the Middle East. Look, I lived in the Middle East. I even have a video. If you care to watch that, I have it at the link below, about what life is like in the Middle East. The Middle East is not all one big country. Each country is different. In the Gulf regions, the oil-rich countries, many residents in those countries are expatriates from all over the world. There are a lot of different cultures and diversity in those countries. And most people are bilingual or trilingual, and English is very commonly spoken. In those countries, a huge variety of books are sold in a variety of languages. However, when you're talking about non-oil-rich or wealthy countries, this may differ. In the cities, you'll have highly educated people, bilingual people, English will be commonly spoken, and then as you move away from the cities to maybe more isolated regions, you'll have people who do not speak English, do not speak a second language, and may not be highly educated. You know where else this might be the case? Every other country in the world. Even in the country of freedom and democracy, the United States of America, you will have people who are bilingual, trilingual, exposed to all these different ideas and perspectives and cultures, and then you will have people who only speak one language, who are not highly educated, and hell, may have never even left their area code or ever met someone of a different race or ethnicity. My point is, this happens everywhere. Now, if what Melissa Chen was trying to say, and I believe this is what she was trying to say, and that is that they are specifically targeting people who do not have access to a formal education. For example, people in refugee camps. Then I am 100% on board. And if anything, more organizations should be doing the same. This is our humanitarian mission. As humans, we should all be able to contribute to this cause, whereby we should all want to and be able to help people in need in as many ways as we possibly can. The problem is when people generalize and say that the Middle East is this one massive refugee camp, uneducated and need to learn to speak English, and get enlightened by Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins so they can be civilized and get the freedom and democracy. When that kind of narrative is being put out there, that's where the issue lies.
Imagine if like you live in, I don't know, say Saudi Arabia, and like, okay, let's just Google it. 10 out of every 10 times, one time there's no answer because the page doesn't exist, or it just, the word feminism doesn't exist in Arabic. So you can't look it up, or secularism doesn't exist.
I get what she's saying here, but just to be fair, the word secularism actually does exist in Arabic. It's almani or almaniya. Feminism, on the other hand, I guess there is a word for it, but I'm assuming saying نظرية المساواة بين الجنسين is a little bit of a mouthful. Nowadays it's actually being referred to as النسوانية, but that is a good point where there are certain modern terms that are not as widespread and available in Arabic. So if someone's looking them up in Arabic, they won't have access to them. So again, agreed.
I just want to live in a world where being ignorant is a choice for everyone.
This I agree with completely 100%. I also want to live in a world where information is readily available to anyone who wants it, anyone who wants to acquire it. Everyone should have access to it, and no one should be limited or restricted access to information simply because of their economic situation. Surely, if we can spend trillions of dollars on war, we can allocate a few dollars to education.
One of the problems of getting them to shift their perception of the world is that they're not exposed to all the great works. They're not exposed to the
different ideas
and different debates.
And they have a monoculture. So monoculture because of society is, they have religions, they have ways of life that are just so deeply entrenched, right?
I might be reading into this, but here is what I indirectly hear when I listen to this. You people, you have your own culture. You have your own way of life. Okay, all right, I get it. Now stop that and learn our way of life. It's better, much better.
And then you also have a really, really heavy censorship, both from your authoritarian government and also from your religion. The first word, for example, the first word in the Quran is actually read.
Really?
But they really mean just read this one thing. And, just the sort of like habits of a free mind are not really cultivated.
Here I kind of agree, but I also disagree at the same time. Let me explain. I agree that many cultures, not just in the Middle East or in South Asia or in Africa or Eastern Asia, it's really all over the world. There are people who do not read as much. They're not exposed. They may be closed-minded and they only read their text and refuse to hear any other opinions or any other views or perspectives. And this may be because of government restrictions, it may be because of religious beliefs. And in many cases, many governments do this in order to maintain control and stay in power. And likewise, some religious clerics do this as well for, quite frankly, the same reason. However, in Islam, this is different. Yes, further to what Melissa Chen said, the first verse in the Quran is Iqra, read. But then she continues to say, read what? Well, only read this book. Yes and no. The first verse revealed in the Quran to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was Iqra, and the verses go as follows. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaqa. Read what? In the name of your Lord who created. خلق الإنسان من علق. Created man from a clot. اقرأ وربك الأكرم. Read, and your Lord is most generous. الذي علم بالقلم. Who taught by the pen. علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. Who taught man what he never knew. Now this talks about reading, and this talks about writing, and this talks about literacy, and this talks about being educated. Sure, this can be interpreted as only matters of religion, but can also be understood in all matters where you should be knowledgeable, you should be educated. And by the way, religion is a field of education and knowledge. There's nothing wrong with that. That in no way restricts you from going out and exposing yourself to the world.
The sort of like habits of a free mind are not really cultivated.
There are many verses in the Quran that tell people to observe, to think, to contemplate, to understand. أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ أَفَلَا يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Many verses that tell us not to be blind followers, Think for yourself. Here's another example. Another verse in the Quran says, in chapter Al-Imran, verse 64, قل يا أهل الكتاب تعالوا إلى كلمة سواء بيننا وبينكم ألا نعبد إلا الله ولا نشرك به شيئا ولا يتخذ بعضنا بعضا أربابا من دون الله فإن تولوا فقولوا اشهدوا بأننا مسلمون. Say, O Muhammad, to the people of the book, let's come to common terms, a common word that we only worship one God. And it goes to the end of the verse. Now my question is, how would Muslims know what the common terms or common word is between the Muslims, Christians, and Jews, the people of the book, if they were not exposed to other religions, beliefs, faiths, perspectives? Therefore, as Muslims, you should also be educated in other religions. Expose yourself to other perspectives and faiths. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in a hadith, or one of his sayings and teachings, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ. Obtaining knowledge is obligatory on every Muslim. Another hadith, although the authenticity is disputed, it says, اطلبوا العلم ولو بالصين. Seek knowledge even if it's as far as China. So in other words, whether you're seeking knowledge of your religion or you're seeking knowledge of science, these Quranic verses, these hadiths, do support being educated. Travel if you have to acquire this knowledge. Expose yourself to other beliefs and perspectives. That's how you grow. There's nothing in Islam that tells you have to sit in a closet, isolated, and never talk to anybody who may have a different opinion. That might be culture, that might be some people's tradition, that might be some sort of restrictions by governments and by people in power and influence. But let's not confuse this with Islam. And this is made very evident by the accomplishments of many historical Muslim empires, such as the Umayyad, the Abbasid, the Ottoman, the Mughal empires, whereby they led the world in scientific discoveries, in medicine, technology, innovations, whereby they contributed to discoveries like algebra, algorithms, chess, surgical equipment, ethanol, making glass, coffee. Yes, coffee from Yemen. You're welcome. And of course, many other accomplishments and discoveries that are still used till today. Unfortunately, since then, and since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, like 100 years ago or so, we've just kind of been chilling, being colonized and then just running dictatorships. In conclusion, I leave you with this. The above arguments I made are just some of the items that I felt needed to be clarified. This whole podcast, this whole episode of the Rogan Experience was, I think, over 2 hours, and it was actually very informative. A variety of topics were covered, and I highly recommend that if you have time, listen to it. It'll broaden your views and expose you to new opinions and new information. With that being said, thank you for watching this video. If you have any other videos that you want me to watch and maybe reply to, maybe further clarify, leave it in the comment section below. And until next time, I'm that Muslim guy. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.